Sharika. It's time now for the Beyond Carlton Memorial Lecture. Our speaker this year is Civic Evangelist Mr. R. Ravichandar. Mr. Ravichandar is actively involved in evangelizing the idea of corporates and civil society coming together to work with government on a City Connect platform that will improve the quality of life in our cities. In Bangalore, Mr. Ravichandar is engaged with road improvement and solid waste management initiatives through Wake Up, Clean Up. He is a member of BBMP Restructuring Expert Committee and the co-chair of the Karnataka Tourism Vision Group. Mr. Ravichandar has a mechanical engineering degree from the Birla Institute of Technology and Science, Pilani, and an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He also has over 34 years of industry experience, and it is a pleasure to have him with us here this evening. His lecture is titled Mission Possible, Implementing Citizen-Led Ideas in City Governance. Please welcome Mr. Ravichandar.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Uday, for having me over today. The first thing that strikes me is it's been 5 years, when I got the message from Uday. And a lot of us, you remember what happened and where you were that day. In fact, my office was just 150 meters down the road from Carlton Towers. One knew Siddharth Padam, one of the 9 who lost their life. And you suddenly find, in a sense, guilty that here we are still around while people have been taken away in the prime of their youth when they could have been saved, as we saw in the clip there. It must have been a very, very devastating day 5 years ago for those who lost their loved ones and those who had grievous injuries. For people like us, I don't think you can even contemplate the kind of irreplaceable loss, the kind of pain, and while time can heal the wounds, I don't think the fundamental ache will ever go away. The happy memories will remain, but it is so unnecessary that this should have happened. My admiration for what Uday and Beyond Carlton is doing is awesome. I think what they are doing, you could easily descend, it's a deep personal anguish. You can descend into a sense of bitterness. But instead of doing that, Beyond Carlton has gone into something very positive. An annual memorial is one thing, but during the course of the year, to have initiatives that ensures that something like Carlton does not happen again, that they filed a PIL to Improve Fire Services Act. They now have an app, which I think is called the Fire Champ, awarding firefighters award for extraordinary service during the year. All I can say, Uday and team, our eternal gratitude that you chose to do something like this out of something so deeply personal in terms of tragedy. More power to your collective elbow. The other thing, when I read about Beyond Carlton, I just said, can I think of other things that happened where people converted personal anguish and tragedy into something larger at an institutional level? And actually, immediately, promptly, 2 images came to mind. The one, of course, was, many of you might recall, Nirja Banot, who was a Pan Am air hostess, and she died in that Pan Am hijacking effort. And her dad set up the Pan Am, the Nirja Banot Bravery Award, and which continues to be awarded for women who show exemplary courage in various spheres of life as they go through life. That was one that came to mind. The other one really was, you always knew this story about Stanford, Leland Stanford back in the late 1800s. They lost their only son to typhoid. And he famously said that we might have lost a son, but we will make every child in San Francisco our child. And that was the genesis of their donation, which set up Stanford University. And today, a century later, Stanford has become such a big institution, and all that started because Mr. and Mrs. Stanford wanted to do something for the larger society from a deep sense of anguish of losing their own son. The other thing which I did before I come to my talk is, these days when you read, you have Google, and as I warned these days, I Googled in terms of trying to figure out major fire tragedies. And then I came across something called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire of 1911 in New York. It killed 146 garment workers. And if you read the stories of that era, people died from smoke inhalation, died from the fire, and died from jumping to their deaths, almost a century earlier. Citizen pressure got some major changes done. In fact, New York's labor law, in fact, the reason a lot of people died in that fire back in 1911, in those days, garment workers used to be locked in so that they didn't go out and waste time in any sense. And that's why a lot more people lost their lives. And this incident brought serious labor law reform, starting with New York and subsequently in the US. Another one I found while researching this thing, the American Society of Fire Safety Engineers was founded and set up 100 years ago, arising from this particular unfortunate fire tragedy. So that was one that struck me as I was doing my Google search. The other one was one in an open stadium. You might recall, those of you who are football fans and the like, in UK, there have been two incidents. One was the Bradford City Stadium fire over 30 years ago, 56 killed, 250 injured. And then there was a Sheffield Stadium where people got crushed and the like. And arising out of that have come a whole lot of legislation and laws which have made people in crowd a lot safer than they ever were. And again, because of citizen-led pressure. Closer home, unfortunately, the story is not so happy and not so encouraging. We had the Upar cinema fire tragedy, which a lot of people know. Mrs. Neelam Krishnamurthy has really fought a valiant battle. But 20 years on, post-Supreme Court pronouncements and the like, we still don't have legislation in terms of, in fact, the Supreme Court said that negligence by public authorities need to be made almost like a criminal offense. Only then people in power will realize that they can't play with lives. But like a lot of things in India, while there is a lot of sound and fury that this must be done, that must be done, these kind of things getting done on the ground is still a big challenge. Which really brings me to what I wanted to talk about, which is, I call myself, Lakshmi gave some introduction, but what I call myself is a professor of lost, hopeless, impossible causes. I've been active for the last 14 years working in the government system, trying to bring change in this space or that space. And it is seriously a challenge, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier, I think professor of lost and hopeless causes sort of ideally describes me. But notwithstanding that, the fact that one is plugging away in the system trying to bring change is why I thought when Uday asked me, I said I'll make my talk in terms of mission possible, how citizen-led ideas can actually find space in the governance system, how we can implement things that actually arise from the wisdom of the crowds, who often know a lot more than what the government system, and in many cases apathetic government system, are willing to accept that these things are required. So that's really the kind of emphasis, and I really wanted to share a lot of anecdotal stories. All of them are Bangalore-based. The first set is about 8 to 10 individual stories of people I know who did something or the other in the larger gamut of improving our quality of life in Bangalore. I know many of us think that Bangalore is also a gone case, but I would think that if these people didn't go and do their little bit, it would have gone by now. So it still hasn't gone because a lot of these people have made efforts in this space. But before I go into those examples, the first thing that, when I go and talk to groups, and I've tried to go to corporates to try and get them interested, saying that, look, if a city doesn't work, your business will suffer, you better get involved in fixing cities and all that stuff. The standard pushback that you get from people, whether it's corporate or individuals, but isn't that the job of government? Don't I pay my taxes and maybe my bribes? Why can't the government of the day deliver? So that's the standard pushback that you get, that my job is to actually earn a living, pay my taxes, go about, and government's job is to make sure that there's respect for law of the land and there are safety provisions and quality of life is good and stuff like that. But the reality on the ground is unfortunately quite different. We had a social contract 60 years ago. The social contract broadly ran along the following lines. Individuals and businesses were to go about their lives, create jobs, pay taxes, and government was supposed to do its job in providing security, law and order, provisioning civic services. The unfortunate thing today, as we look around, and that's why you have phrases like public-private partnership and the like, is this social contract has broken. We can holler all that we want. We can say that we have been duped, we have been taken for a ride or whatever, but the reality is, if we don't find ways to engage with the government system to bring about change, apocalypse, trust me, is around the corner. Some of us who have gone and worked in what I would call the belly of the beast, it's not a particularly pretty sight. And the takeaway really there is that ordinary citizens need to do their bit, need to get involved, and help in a collaborative manner fix this place and make it a better place for all citizens. So moving on to some examples. In fact, the first example, I must confess, I became a member of the Bangalore Agenda Task Force back in 2000 during S.M. Krishna's time when Nandan was the chairman. He asked me, would you serve on this? I had no clue what it involved to work with government. I didn't know anybody in government. But I just said, okay, I'm willing to take a shot at it. And of course, one got hooked, and there's another story down that thing. But I remember when we started the BATF, there was a particular thing that happened almost 2 months into our BATF era. The Bangalore police, that time, Ajay Kumar Singh and M.N. Reddy, who's now the commissioner, called us and said, look, meet these 3 citizens in Bangalore who have given us some plan, and would the BATF look at it and say what we should do with this? So what's the story here about what the citizens did? These 3 citizens are ordinary, almost faceless. In fact, I really feel guilty that I don't even know those 3 names today, who spent 6 months in Bangalore back in 1999 in 110 junctions in Bangalore, measuring the traffic flow, and they came up on their own, and these are not even professional traffic engineers or anything. In fact, if I remember right, one was a real estate broker and one was something else. They came up on their own initiative with a plan of how you could fix Bangalore's through a one-way traffic management program. 3 people, unpaid, 6 months, 110 junctions. Today, what you see, and subsequently, of course, people like Salim and all, they got names like One-Way Salim and stuff like that. But the genesis was not government, not some consultant, but these 3 citizens. And what you see around Kantirwa Stadium, that was what was called the Central Area Traffic Plan. We brought in professionals who looked at what amateurs had done, and 80% of their plan was pretty good, and that was the genesis of Bangalore's one-way traffic thing. Today, you can't even imagine that you can move around if you continue to have the two-way. And I'll tell you unintentionally what they helped do for Bangalore. Around the same time, at Hudson Circle, the BMP, then BMP, wanted to do a 120 crore flyover, saying that is the answer that we need to do, because the BMP loves projects, because projects means a lot of things. And this one-way trip around Kantirwa Stadium through Malya Hospital actually made that Hudson Circle flyover redundant, and to this date it hasn't been built. It would have started as a 120 crore project, it would have continued for 5 years and bloated into a 250 crore project, and would have done nothing much for the city. And again, these citizens had an influence on scale on something like that. I remember another gentleman those days, there was a Mr. Parameshwar, who used to meet us quite often. Single-handedly, over a set of years, Mr. Parameshwar's passion was bus transport. He had come out with a whole booklet of how we could fix BMTC's bus route. He had looked at all the places that need to be covered, and he pointed out back in 2001, 2002, that what Bangalore needs is really a direction-oriented bus system and not a destination-oriented bus system. You know, the destination-oriented bus system is you'll have bus number 12 going from here to there, 12A going from here to somewhere else, as opposed to direction which tends to go on arterial roads, and you can maybe take a bus on the ring road, 2 buses, but you move faster. And I remember we all kept listening to him, and we tried to do something. We were not that successful. But for 4-5 years, he was going up and down, went to courts to push the idea. And while he couldn't pull it off, at a later date, you know, when Abide was there and Ashwin Mahesh was involved in the Big 10 buses that you see today, the genesis of, and the idea of the Big 10 buses, have a bus every 5 minutes going towards Electronic City on the same road, is something again driven by citizens, people like Parmeshwar and people like Ashwin Mahesh, who made that a reality. Talking of Ashwin Mahesh, who's also a dear friend, another example, you might have heard about the B-track system. You see those things and, you know, all the CCTV cameras and the like. Anybody can buy cameras. Anybody can do a lot of those kind of purchases. But the trick is to make them work together. Mobile phone data, cell phone congestion data, GPS on buses, and the traffic signal data, to integrate them, to give actionable outcomes such that you can control traffic. Traffic in Bangalore is clearly messy, but trust me, it would have been much worse if people like Ashwin Mahesh had not worked within the police system. The police bought the cameras and all the hardware stuff, but the soft thing on how to make it work were made by private citizens. And as I told you, while it looks messy, things would have been a lot worse if you did not have something like B-track in place. In fact, today, the B-track mechanism, they raise close to about 60-70 crores of fine money in the city for the police. Coming to something more recent, there are 2 very, very courageous ladies, Jenny Pinto and Priya Rao. And what have they done for us? And it's still a work in progress. They went to the court with a PIL that our footpaths are not walkable, obstructions. They went to the court at great risk to take on contractor mafias and the like, and the case is still in court. And you must see some of the submissions that BBMP have taken. I mean, I have not seen better photoshopped pictures saying that, is this Bangalore? Showing that as though we have great footpaths and great sidelined avenues in Bangalore, instead of admitting that we have a serious problem and we will fix it. But these 2 individuals, I think, are onto something very big, because at the heart of it, it really embraces the idea as to who is the most important person on the road. Is it the person in the car? Is it the person in the mobike? Or is it the pedestrian? And it is basically to establish that principle. All civilized societies build their roads around the most vulnerable person on the road, which is the pedestrian. And these 2 ladies, it's a work in progress, and some roads, particularly in some of the areas, have started getting cleaned thanks to this PIL. Then there's another gentleman, some of you might know him, C.N. Kumar. I mean, he has filed at least 200, 300, I've lost track of the number of RTIs he has filed, particularly on building plan violation and institutional structure. We have something called the 74th Amendment, which is a constitutional amendment, which actually should be the law, which asks for something called MPC. Those are technical aspects, Metropolitan Planning Committee. But people like C.N. Kumar go to court and say, why is something which is clearly enshrined in the Constitution not a reality on the ground? And that's another case in court where the MPC is something that the court is looking at vis-a-vis what's constitutional. Again, citizens taking recourse to law, taking recourse to other measures, or collaboratively working, like I spoke about the traffic examples, to try and bring change on a scale basis. Another similar one, some of you might have followed what the Koramangala residents have done. Vijayan Menon, Nitin Seshadri, Dr. Radhakrishnan, ordinary people living ordinary lives, but come together because they just find that the larger community is under threat, and initiatives that they take end up benefiting the larger city. So what's the thing which they went at, again at great personal risk? They went to court essentially saying that commercial establishments cannot be there in residential neighborhoods because pubs were getting opened, BPOs were getting opened in Koramangala, making residential life seriously miserable. And I remember when they first went to court with this, the first thing that BBMP did was to send inspectors to their house to measure their house dimensions to see if they could compromise them to get them to pull off the PIL on this particular issue. But they stuck on. And today we have a High Court judgment which says that you cannot do this kind of commercial establishments of certain kinds in residential neighborhoods because, again, citizens, it might be to protect their own neighborhood, but they end up actually embracing a larger principle. And now, if those of you who follow papers, it is an unending, eternal vigilance that's required in this place. You do something, and the system strikes back in another way. So right now, there is this whole thing about 40 feet road and less than 12 meters. So actually, there is a law which says you need to be 40 feet or more for certain buildings to be cleared of a certain size, etc., which has implications in terms of what we are talking about, fire and the like. And what does the BDA do? They issue a notification which says this is applicable beyond 12 meters. Now, unfortunately, 12 meters converts itself to 39.3 feet, which really means a lot of the 40 feet roads, it's open season for giving commercial licenses and the like. Again, the issue is back in court saying that 12 meters is not equal to 40 feet and eternal vigilance against citizens going and holding a mirror in terms of what we need to do. A newer thing for those of you who are active, and if you're from the Whitefield area or active on social media and the like, there's a new kid on the block, the latest Resident Welfare Association, the Whitefield Rising Group, which is extremely active in getting the community together to lobby for change, to make sure and holler about the fact that the place is not working, to get noticed, and whether it be lakes or whether it be roads and congestion, they are working in that particular space. Talking of lakes, there's a Puttanhalli Lake movement. There's Venkata Subbarao, who won the Nama Bangalore Award last year. A bunch of citizens who have gone, what should be the work of government, protecting lakes, because water is so fundamental to our future security. You would think that governments would be interested in protecting that. But what do we have had governments do over a period of time with, let's say, builders and whatever? Convert the National Games Village, that lake, into a building, convert Kantirwa Stadium, the lake, into a building, with no care or concern for short-term profits. And it then requires vigilant citizens. Mr. Venkata Subbarao, I think, has been on the subject for over 10, 12 years consistently on the whole idea of preserving lakes. You have cycle days where people who are passionate about that, where you would think government would take a greater lead in making some of these things happen and the like. There are people like Katyani Chamraj, for instance. Ever since I have known her, which I think for 15, 20 years, she's just plodding away in the government place to say that we need citizen participation, voice of the citizen needs to be heard, and the like. So this, for example, is a set of people, I think I've reeled out some 9 or 10 very quick examples to show that there are a lot of people who are out there at one level almost anonymously plugging away, but the things that they are doing has a larger societal good, and the things that they are doing are making our institutions work quite differently than they would have if they had not intervened. Moving on to a set of examples where I have been personally involved, starting from the BATF, JNNURM, and City Connect and the like, just to share a few examples. Back in 2000, when as part of the BATF, one was fortunate to get a space in the system to create something in the area of property tax. Today, 14 years later, many of us take self-assessment scheme of property tax as a given. But back in 2000, it didn't exist. And I was fortunate that I was given a chance and we were able to design the self-assessment scheme of property tax, which is built on a basic premise: trust the citizen to tell the truth, then expect the revenue officer to uncover a lie. And very, very conservatively, we have removed 200 to 300 crores of bribe money per year, because for those who can recall time before 2000, bribing the revenue officers to fix your tax was par for the course. Today, most people don't even know who their revenue officer is, because systemically, because we were in a position where you had the CM listening to what we were saying, and we could push some reform through the system. Ramesh Ramanathan at that time, again in the BATF, did some amazing work, not visible today, on the fund-based accounting system. I'm not getting into the technicalities of that, but it's an amazing piece of work. A flawed model is working in BBMP today, but what he had designed 14 years ago, trust me, is way ahead of its time, and we'll be lucky if it gets implemented in 20 years' time and the system embraces it. Kalpana Kar, who worked on waste, again in the BATF thing, she coined the idea of segregation at source and Swachha Bangalore back in 2001. I mean, today Swachha Bharat Abhiyan is mainstream in 2014. But 2001, actually we were on a right track out there. Of course, then BATF closed up, and some of these things are not sustainable efforts for a variety of reasons. And then you go through a crisis, and now people like Kalpana are seriously active in the expert committee and the like, and it's not an easy thing to take on the garbage mafia and fix and bring proper tendering systems. But citizens are sitting there, Ramakant, Almitra Patel, and a whole host of others, sitting and trying to break their head how we can still fix this problem. I remember the time, again, back in the BATF days, when an idea struck that let's make Lalbagh sustainable over the next 100 years. So we came up with a project, and Mr. Jaikar Jerome accepted that he would do it, which is to dredge the lake, to put up a sewage treatment plant, 1.5 million liter per day sewage treatment plant by Degremont out there, and sprinkler system, such that today we have a system in Lalbagh which you're taking it for granted, but we have made Lalbagh future-proof for centuries to come with that kind of an intervention, because earlier it was dependent on the lake and borewell water to actually water those lawns, which is no longer the case. But again, the idea came from people who are outside the system. Then when BATF closed down, 4 of us under Nandan's leadership, we went to Delhi to make 10, 15 trips. You know, this country is full of alphabet soups. There was something called the JNNURM, National Urban Renewal Mission. Jawaharlal Nehru, you must have seen those buses painted. Again, a bunch of forced citizens going to the central government and saying, hello, we have an idea of what we can do for our urban cities. I'm not saying it's the greatest program the way it got rolled out, but citizens who went and told government, here's another way to think about how to do this. And then using your contacts to lobby to get that accepted and mainstream in the government system. In fact, I remember our first meeting in the Planning Commission when Montek and all were there. We went with this PowerPoint presentation about what we can do at the national level to set up this mission. And we were laughed off that table literally by the Planning Commission members who said, we are reading all these reports about Bangalore's infrastructure problems. What makes you so wise on the subject? And we immediately replied, you learn more from failures than from success. So that's why you ought to listen to us. Moving on to something more recent, I and some others have been involved in this Tender Sure project. A lot of people bash us up on Tender Sure, saying that, oh my God, the motorist lane has come down, and you see what's happening in. There's still a challenge on the way it's getting implemented on the ground and the speed of execution. But the idea is built on a fundamental idea that some of us went to the government system and made the case that we need to build, it goes back to the point I made earlier about the PIL on footpaths, that we need to build our cities, especially our walkways, through having the pedestrian at the heart of our planning system. 1 pedestrian dies in Bangalore every day. So there are about 360 pedestrian deaths last year on Bangalore's roads. 1 in 2 trips every day by Bangaloreans is partly or fully on foot. Even if I'm taking a bus, I'm walking part of the way, then I take a bus, I walk again part of the way, that's partly. My maidservant walks from her house to my house and goes back, that's a fully walk trip. That's the kind of movement on foot. But nothing about our roads are planned around that constituency. So some of us felt strongly that we need to do that, and we tabled an idea. Now, it's for the city to decide going forward whether you want to embrace an idea which goes around pedestrians, cyclists, bus transport followed by motorists as the hierarchy, or you believe that everything just needs to be taken over by the motorists. I don't believe that. I really believe that we need to have a better public transport system. Our current model of 5 million vehicles for a 10 million population growing by the day is a non-sustainable model. And in 3-5 years, unless we have an alternate way of looking at this whole mobility stuff, this place is going to be in gridlock and collapse. So some of us who believe strongly go and table this. Some have pilloried us saying that some bunch of people are just going and doing this. And my answer to that is very simple. If you have an alternate way to solve the mobility problem, table it. Let's have a debate on what the way forward on this is. Let the government of the day decide what's the way to do this. But staying and doing nothing as business as usual is not viable. Of course, currently, which I'm not going to stress on in this particular talk, I've been fortunate enough to be asked to serve on the BBMP Restructuring Committee. There are 3 of us, 2 former government officials, Chief Secretary and a former BBMP Commissioner, Mr. Sidaya, and I'm the citizen member, if I can call it that. And one is honored to be able to get a chance in the government system to try and bring some kind of change. And what I've discovered personally for myself, if you work in this system and in a position, of course, to be able to do it, then small incremental changes in the public system gives you far greater joy than any achievement that I've ever had in my life in the private sector. That's really been my personal observation. So I spoke about examples by others, some that I was involved in. What are the kind of models of involvement, of citizen-led involvement in the government system? One model is where the government of the day gives you space to work within it. So the Bangalore Agenda Task Force was an example of that. Abide during the Yediyurappa government was another example of that. Today, BBMP restructuring, calling somebody from outside, people like Ashwin Mahesh working on decongestion committee, are people from outside given space by the government of the day, saying, hey, why don't you come and help us? We'd be better off if we work collaboratively. So that's one model. Another model is you work from the outside. So the City Connect, for example, that we have got, where industry takes the lead, whether it's a tender show project or something on garbage or whatever, where from the outside, you build a case, you spend some money, you pilot an idea, and then go to government and say, and you use advocacy, you use influence in a certain sense to push with data, saying this might be a nice thing to do. So that really is a system from the outside. But that model works provided you have people in the government system willing to listen to you. The third one, of course, is a lot of these collaborative efforts. Whitefield Rising collaborates with the neighborhood BBMP and police and etc., saying, boss, let's just push the envelope. It's seriously difficult, but it's a whole collaborative model which a lot of people follow. Then you have the activist model, where people are so seriously frustrated, saying the only way these guys are going to come to their senses is to knock them. Go move the courts, do some dharnas, because that's the only way the system is going to listen to you, is another model. And then there are a whole lot of NGOs who are doing amazing work in this whole space, individual citizens who are plugging away on causes that are dear to them. My own sense really is, for citizen-led initiatives to get implemented in government, you need all of them. There is no one route that this is the only way to bring about change in this place. There's a multitude of routes that can be adopted to make this happen. But there are a few words of caution. Working with government, this monolith 800-pound gorilla, seriously insensitive. There are lots of good people in government, but there are also terrible people in government. So let's not keep on saying there are good people, good people. The mix exists. It's a kind of a fabric of society or whatever. But at the end of the day, this whole monolith comes through as a fairly insensitive, inhumane kind of thing which is out there to make our life more difficult. You want information, ask for it for RTI. I will not proactively give you anything. Make life difficult. Stretch it out and hope that you will give up and go away. I remember when we did the self-assessment scheme and got it with great difficulty, 2-3 years by confusing the city with capital value, this value, that value, they tried to change back and go back to the old system. But some of us had to work behind the scenes to make sure that a reform brought on the table was not reversed. I'm not getting into the details. You take something like a citizen participation law that the government passed 1 year ago. Now, the citizen participation law is a farce. It's a checkbox item of JNNURM to get money from the center that you will pass a law. But the way the law is written, it's an absolute farce. And therefore, you have to be vigilant to figure out how to change it, because what's written out there? Let's say you have a neighborhood of 30,000 people. Forget about ward committee, which has got 10 people, which is not working. Suppose all the 30,000 people got together and said, we must spend our 20 lakhs in improving this park. Every citizen in the ward said that. The way the law is written, the corporator can say, sorry, I don't think the money should be spent there, I'm going to spend it somewhere else. The corporator's word holds. It's fundamentally wrong. You got to find a way that the voice of the citizen between two elections is still honored and has space in the system. But you have an insensitive law which gives veto rights. So I'm giving you a very extreme example that everybody in the neighborhood wants it, but it can still be vetoed, is the kind of law that we have got out there. Ward committees across Bangalore. Another sham. I mean, the constitution says it should be there, but it doesn't work anywhere because the elected people just say boo to it. We all have to figure out how to make it work and not allowed to be booed off the table on that particular thing. Which brings me to the last example of why eternal vigilance is required. Take the case of Akrama Sakrama. Some of you might know of it. Akrama Sakrama, simply put, is saying it's fine if you violated various things at various levels over the past. We will regularize it with a fine today. Now this, if the government of the day says that I'm in the regularization business, how are you going to do beyond Carlton and get enforcement and respect for law of the land and stuff like that? But everybody is drooling with the prospect of the money that can be raised through something like Akrama Sakrama. It's fundamentally goes against, which means those of us who followed the law and stayed within the norms were fools. Those of us who exceeded FSI, didn't leave setback, are the guys who are getting rewarded. It is fundamentally flawed. But you can pass such a law, it gets signed, and we are close to, first time around, again activists went and stalled the implementation. Then they passed some more thing, it's come back for re-implementation again. That's why I make the point that it is necessary to be eternally vigilant if you really want to protect what is rightfully ours. It's unfortunate that we have to do it, but that's the nature of the beast and the nature of the ecosystem. Which really brings me to the conclusion of my speech. What I've learned working in this space is the following. I mean, these are very simplistically put. There are 99 reasons out of 100 why something will not work in our country, and especially when it has something to do with government. 99. And I can give you flowery reasons of why something cannot work. But I think what we have to do, and people like you have taken the evening off to be here, is we have to look for that one reason where we can make it happen. That one little opening in the wall by which we can bring change happen. Unless we plug away in that manner, trust me, if you listen to the reasons why something will not happen here, every morning you'll be the most depressed creature in this world. But you've got to keep looking for that one opening, that one reason. You have to get out of bed and say, no, I will still try and do this, rather than give in to the negativists, the naysayers, that I told you so, that this is not going to happen. Many things may not happen, but let it not happen because despite our trying, we still lost. But let it not be that we raised the white flag and said, sorry, this can't be done. I give you examples of people who are not raising the white flag, people who are pushing the envelope to make some of these things happen. The second thing really is, each of us in our own way needs to find ways to stay engaged in the system. Some of us have a lot more time. We are financially well off. So we are in a happy position to be able to do this, and we are passionate about this thing. Some others may not. They might be able to just spend 2 hours a week on an issue like this. Or you say, I can't even do that, but I can just be a good citizen who does not litter and does not jump traffic signal. To each our own. But we have to figure out how to stay engaged with the government system and do our bit, either as a responsible citizen that's given, and in any which way that you can contribute in collaborative efforts to bring about change in the system. You've got to stay engaged, do what's feasible. However minor it is, it really doesn't matter. While individual projects are welcome, saying you do a project here, do a project there, I think what we all need to work on, and those of us who are in a position to influence change on scale, is try to bring change at an institutional level so that India's problems, Bangalore's problems are all huge. None of them are small single-digit numbers. They're running into thousands and lakhs, any kind of problem. So we need things, so the Beyond Carlton has to set its goal that I will set high bars that something like Carlton can never happen, and God forbid it happens like the tower that got burnt in Dubai. No life was lost. So disasters may still happen despite our best efforts, but the value of human life, what do you put on that? I mean, it's just not possible. So you got to set bars of that particular kind, and we need to do what it takes to get there. And if it means taking on an insensitive administration, if it means taking on negligible and corrupt people to show them their place, so be it. That's really, it's not easy, but this is something that we need to do. Thank you once again, Uday, for having me here, and thank you.